Western Civilization, The Phenomenal Truth. Let me tell you a wild story, not one about dragons or superheroes, though there are a few mighty battles and toga-wearing thinkers, but one even more real, strange, and fantastic. It's the story of Western civilization. Buckle up, because this is the tale of how a small bunch of ancient people with sandals, scrolls, swords, and big ideas managed to build something that would shape nearly every corner of the modern world. And no, I'm not exaggerating. Without them, we wouldn't have democracy, pizza, plumbing, philosophy class, Netflix. Okay, maybe not directly, but you get the point. It all begins, like any good story, in a land of myths and goats, ancient Greece. A rocky, mountainous region where people were constantly arguing, but in a productive way. These were the folks who loved asking questions. What is justice? What is the good life? Why does my neighbor keep talking about Plato again? The Greeks weren't perfect. They had slaves and left women out of important decisions, but they did something no one had really done before. They made thinking cool. Socrates walked around annoying people with questions until they realized their beliefs didn't make sense. Plato wrote dialogues that still mess with people's minds today. And Aristotle, well, he basically wrote the first version of everything: ethics, science, politics. The Greeks invented democracy, though only for free men, and they held Olympic games where athletes competed naked for glory. Yes, naked. Apparently, gym shorts weren't invented yet. But Greece, as clever as it was, eventually got conquered, first by Alexander the Great, who spread Greek culture all the way to India, and then by a slightly grumpy group of people who loved roads, rules, and really big buildings, the Romans. If the Greeks were the philosophers of the West, the Romans were its engineers and administrators. They built aqueducts that carried water across miles, roads that armies marched on, and cities with bathhouses and theaters. They created the idea of a republic, where leaders were chosen, in theory, by the people. And even when Rome turned into an empire and got a bit obsessed with emperors who thought they were gods, it still gave us law, Latin, and the idea that civilization means order, structure, and, let's be honest, good plumbing. Now here's where the story takes a dramatic twist, because Rome, as powerful as it was, fell. Barbarians invaded, the economy collapsed, and suddenly, Europe looked like a party that got out of hand. The so-called Dark Ages followed, though historians today say they weren't completely dark. There were candles, after all. And monasteries. These were the quiet places where monks copied books by hand, preserved ancient knowledge, and probably got really good at calligraphy. While kingdoms rose and fell, and knights rode around whacking each other with swords, one idea survived: Christianity. A religion born in the Roman Empire. Centered on a carpenter from Nazareth named Jesus, whose teachings about love, forgiveness, and eternal life ended up reshaping the entire moral core of the West. For better or worse, Europe became Christendom, and this faith influenced everything: art, laws, holidays, even how people treated the poor. Meanwhile, over in the Islamic world, scholars were saving Greek texts, doing advanced science, and making Europe look a bit behind. Eventually, Western Europe began waking up again, and what followed was the Renaissance, which literally means rebirth. People like Leonardo da Vinci started drawing flying machines and painting mysterious smiles, while thinkers like Erasmus and Petrarch started reading dusty old Greek and Roman books with new eyes. Humanism was the buzzword. It meant focusing on human potential, reason, and creativity. Basically, the Middle Ages were about God and kings. The Renaissance was like, hey, what about us? It was like Europe rediscovered it had a brain and decided to use it. And then came the Reformation, cue dramatic music. In the 1500s, a German monk named Martin Luther got annoyed at the church for selling indulgences, basically, get out of hell free cards, and nailed a list of complaints to a door. This act split Christianity into Catholics and Protestants, leading to centuries of religious wars, debates, and eventually, ironically, more freedom of thought. Out of all that chaos came an idea that would light the next fire: if people can read the Bible for themselves, why not let them read everything? And question everything? Enter the scientific revolution. People like Galileo, Newton, and Kepler realized that the universe followed rules, and if you observed, experimented, and crunched numbers, you could understand those rules. Gravity wasn't just something that made apples fall on heads, it was part of a grand, cosmic design. Science took off like a rocket, though they didn't have rockets yet, and with it came a new way of seeing the world: rational, curious, and fearless. Then, in the 1700s, came the Enlightenment, basically, history's biggest group project of smart people writing sassy letters and books about freedom, rights, and reason. Voltaire poked fun at superstition, Locke argued for natural rights, and Rousseau dreamed of a society where people ruled themselves. This wasn't just dinner table talk, it changed governments. In America, some scrappy colonists took Enlightenment ideas and said, hey King George, we're out of here. Boom, the American Revolution. Then the French tried it too, and things got messy. Guillotines aren't exactly subtle, but the message was clear: power comes from the people, not just crowns or crosses. So by the 1800s, Western civilization had already packed a lot into the backpack of history. Philosophy from Greece, law from Rome, religion from Christianity, art and reason from the Renaissance, science from the Revolution, and political ideals from the Enlightenment. But it all roses and symphonies. As Europe got stronger, it also got greedy. Empires spread like butter on bread, colonizing lands from Africa to Asia, claiming it's for their own good, while grabbing gold, spices, and resources. This dark chapter in Western history, colonialism, caused enormous suffering, even as it spread Western languages, laws, and technology. Then came the 20th century, and with it, the full blast of both brilliance and brutality. World War I shattered old empires and illusions. World War II followed, with horrors like the Holocaust and atomic bombs. But from the ashes rose new dreams, the United Nations, human rights, democracy, space exploration, and the idea that maybe, just maybe, humanity could work together. America and Europe, once rivals and monarchies, now became leaders of a Western world defined not just by geography, but by values, freedom, individual rights, rule of law, and a belief in progress. Of course, the story doesn't stop there. The West continues to evolve, sometimes stumbling, sometimes sprinting. Today, we live in a world filled with smartphones, memes, debates about AI, and yes, lots of pizza, thank you, Italy. Western civilization gave us Beethoven and Beyonce, Shakespeare and Star Wars, Newton's laws and civil rights laws. It also left a lot of messes, wars, inequalities, and mistakes we still wrestle with. But here's the phenomenal truth. Western civilization is a story of ideas, of what it means to be human, to seek truth, to argue about justice, to invent, to believe, and to try, again and again, to build a better world. So, if you ever wonder why your school has science class, why your country has elections, or why you can stand up and speak your mind, remember this. You're living in the echo of a conversation that started thousands of years ago in a rocky little place called Greece, was carried by Romans with helmets, rewritten by monks with feather pens, reignited by painters and printers, and questioned by rebels, revolutionaries, and dreamers. You're part of that story. And now it's your turn to shape it, hopefully with fewer swords and more snacks. Western civilization is not just a region of the world or a collection of powerful nations. It is a story, a long, complicated, extraordinary story about how ideas, people, cultures, and struggles gave birth to the world we live in today. It is a story of beginnings in ancient river valleys, of questions whispered in marble halls, of libraries burned and rebuilt, of revolutions, empires, dreams, and disasters. It is a story still unfolding, and you are part of it. The roots of Western civilization reach deep into the soil of the ancient Near East, but its spirit as we know it begins in two very different places, Jerusalem and Athens. From Jerusalem came the moral and spiritual vision, the belief in one God, the idea that history has meaning, that every human being has worth, and that justice and mercy are not optional, but essential. From Athens came the intellectual and political awakening. The birth of philosophy, the invention of democracy, and the commitment to reason, debate, and human dignity. The ancient Greeks, living in small, fiercely independent city-states, gave the West its earliest expressions of freedom and critical thought. They asked questions no one had dared to ask before. What is truth? What is the good life? What is justice? Socrates challenged people to think for themselves. Plato dreamed of ideal forms and just societies. Aristotle studied the world carefully, categorizing life, politics, ethics, and logic. The Greeks wrote tragedy and comedy, studied the stars, built temples, and experimented with democracy in a way that would echo across millennia. But ideas alone cannot survive without power, and this is where Rome enters the story. If the Greeks gave the West its mind, the Romans gave it muscle and structure. The Roman Republic was not perfect, but it was a massive leap forward in the art of governance. Combining law, checks and balances, citizenship, and civil society. And when the Republic fell and the Empire rose, Rome gave the West something else, unity, roads, written law, and a Latin language that would become the foundation of many modern ones. They ruled from Scotland to Syria, and their presence shaped cities, economies, architecture, and administration. But Rome could not last forever. Inside its borders, something powerful was growing, Christianity. It began with a Jewish carpenter and teacher named Jesus of Nazareth, whose message of love, humility, repentance, and hope captured hearts and challenged empires. Christians were persecuted for centuries, but they grew in number and conviction. Eventually, under Emperor Constantine in the 4th century, Christianity was legalized, and then embraced as the spiritual soul of the Roman world. With this fusion, Jerusalem and Rome met, faith and order, heaven and empire. The Western Roman Empire in 476 AD, Europe entered a long and turbulent period. It was not entirely dark, but it was fragmented, chaotic, and often brutal. Yet something important happened. Monasteries preserved learning. The church preserved unity. And even as kingdoms rose and fell, the old Roman and Christian ideals remained like seeds under the soil, waiting to grow again. Slowly, painfully, a new civilization emerged, one that fused Roman law, Christian morality, and tribal warrior culture into something that, over centuries, would become Europe. Then came a reawakening, the Renaissance. In the 14th to 16th centuries, scholars, artists, and thinkers in Italy and beyond began rediscovering the wisdom of the ancient world. They read Greek and Roman texts with new eyes. They painted, sculpted, and invented. They began to ask new questions about humanity, beauty, and knowledge. Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael expressed the dignity of man. Meanwhile, scientists began testing the world, carefully, patiently, and laid the foundation for what would become modern science. But the Renaissance didn't just rediscover the past. It also challenged the present. In 1517, a German monk named Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the door of a church and launched the Reformation, a movement that would fracture Western Christianity, ignite wars, and eventually lead to the rise of individual conscience, freedom of religion, and national churches. The printing press, invented just decades earlier, helped ideas spread faster than ever before. People began reading the Bible themselves, thinking for themselves, and eventually, governing themselves. All of this culminated in the Enlightenment, a bold and brilliant era of thought in the 17th and 18th centuries, when Western philosophers and scientists declared that reason, not tradition, should guide human life. Thinkers like John Locke spoke of liberty and natural rights. Montesquieu wrote about the separation of powers. Voltaire mocked tyranny. Rousseau called for a new social contract. And Immanuel Kant challenged humanity to dare to know. This intellectual fire lit the fuse of revolutions. The American Revolution in 1776 was the first great political experiment based on Enlightenment ideals: liberty, limited government, the rule of law, and the rights of man. The French Revolution followed in 1789 with its rallying cry of liberty, equality, fraternity. But revolution came with cost and violence. Not all Enlightenment ideals led to peace. Some paved the road to nationalism, imperialism, and even terror. The 19th century saw the rise of industry and the birth of modern nations. The Industrial Revolution, beginning in Britain, changed everything. Machines replaced hand tools. Factories replaced farms. Steam-powered engines, trains, and ships. Life became faster, cities larger, and society more complex. With this came both hope and hardship. Wealth and poverty. Innovation and injustice. The West began to dominate the globe not just through ideas, but through technology and empire. European powers carved up Africa, Asia, and the Middle East, exporting their systems but often ignoring local cultures and values. Colonization left deep scars we still see today. Then came the 20th century, a time of triumph and tragedy. 2 world wars shattered the illusion of progress. Tens of millions died. Technology was turned into terror: tanks, machine guns, poison gas, atomic bombs. But even in horror, Western civilization gave birth to responses, to resistance, to rebuilding, to the idea that peace and rights must be protected. The United Nations was created. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights was written. The Civil Rights Movement in America, the fall of fascism and communism, and the spread of democracy were all part of this great effort to redeem what had been broken. By the late 20th and early 21st century, Western civilization had become both global and divided. On one hand, it spread values like freedom of speech, scientific inquiry, equality before the law, and the belief in progress. On the other, it faced challenges: moral confusion, environmental crises, political polarization, spiritual emptiness. Yet its foundations remained. At its core, Western civilization is not a race, or a nation, or a continent. It is a long argument between truth and power, reason and faith, freedom and order, the individual and the community. It is a tradition that believes ideas matter. That people are not property. That truth can be discovered, even if slowly. That justice is worth striving for. And that no civilization, no matter how flawed, is beyond redemption. So what is the phenomenal truth of Western civilization? It is this: our world today, with its science, democracy, art, technology, human rights, universities, parliaments, and debates, was not inevitable. It was forged by centuries of struggle, sweat, blood, and belief. And though it has stumbled many times, it has also risen, again and again, because at its best, it calls us not to power, but to virtue. Not to comfort, but to conscience. Not to domination, but to dignity. Western civilization is a gift. Not a perfect one. Not a finished one. But a gift nonetheless, passed from generation to generation, often wrapped in both glory and grief. Now, it belongs to you. Learn it. Question it. Add to it. Defend the best of it. And never forget that history is not just what came before you. History is also what comes through you. Western civilization did not begin with skyscrapers, smartphones, or democracy. It began with sheep. And sandals. Somewhere around the eastern Mediterranean, a few tribes figured out how to stop chasing goats and instead grow wheat. This was considered an upgrade. They built cities, invented writing, and unfortunately, taxes. Mesopotamia and Egypt made the early prototypes. But the real drama begins when 2 unusual cultures stepped forward: the Greeks and the Hebrews. The Greeks asked, "What is truth?" The Hebrews asked, "Who is God?" Western civilization never really recovered from those 2 questions. The Greeks invented philosophy, logic, drama, and government based on voting by landowning men who hated each other. They were passionate about freedom and equally passionate about enslaving people to maintain it. Meanwhile, the Hebrews wrote a book. It took centuries. It was about creation, morality, justice, love, exile, obedience, and the unsettling possibility that the universe has a purpose and you might not be it. Then came Rome. Rome saw what Greece was doing and thought, great ideas, but can we add roads and crucifixions? Rome was less concerned with truth or holiness and more concerned with aqueducts, military discipline, and making sure no one else was in charge. They admired Greek art, stole Greek gods, hired Greek tutors, and burned the occasional Greek city. Balance. Their empire was vast, efficient, brutal, and deeply concerned with plumbing. The Romans had one goal: to make the entire known world Roman. They almost succeeded, right up until the barbarians, corruption, and a few centuries of decadence made that difficult. Before Rome collapsed entirely, a strange event happened. A Jewish teacher was executed by the state for claiming, in so many words, that love was stronger than death. This message was unpopular. For about 3 centuries, his followers were hunted, martyred, and thrown to lions, which did not make them less persistent. Eventually, the Roman Empire, in a display of practical panic, decided to adopt Christianity rather than continue losing to it. The result was something called Christendom, which meant God was now part of the empire, or the empire was part of God. It was unclear. After Rome fell in the West, a process that took centuries and involved many bearded men named something like Alaric, the idea of civilization moved into monasteries. Monks, many of whom had taken vows of silence, preserved books by copying them by hand in total silence, which is probably how they stayed sane. The early medieval period was a mix of invasions, plagues, and awkward attempts at kingship. It was called the Dark Ages, mostly because historians didn't know much about it and found it moody. Then, suddenly, people remembered ancient Greece and Rome. This was called the Renaissance. It was mostly funded by wealthy Italian merchants who felt guilty about getting rich from banking and war. They hired artists to paint saints and scientists to study cadavers. The result was a burst of creativity. Michelangelo carved marble like it was butter. Leonardo da Vinci painted mysterious smiles and drew helicopters no one asked for. People rediscovered Plato, Aristotle, and the fact that the earth might revolve around the sun. This was controversial. The church, now headquartered in Rome and very much in charge, responded by selling indulgences. These were spiritual receipts for sins not yet committed. A German monk named Martin Luther thought this was theologically and economically suspicious. In 1517, he nailed a list of complaints to a church door. This was the 16th century version of tweeting. The church was not amused. The result was the Protestant Reformation, an event that created wars, nations, and denominations, many of which still argue about who's doing communion wrong. Meanwhile, something called the scientific revolution happened. People stopped accepting that the stars do things because Aristotle said so, and started looking through telescopes. Galileo discovered Jupiter had moons. Newton discovered gravity. He may also have discovered that apples fall. Scientific laws replaced magical thinking, at least until quantum physics ruined everything again. At this point, thinkers in Europe began to wonder if reason could fix everything. This era was called the Enlightenment. Philosophers began writing long books with small fonts and confident titles. John Locke proposed that all men have natural rights. Montesquieu said governments should have checks and balances. Voltaire made fun of everyone. Rousseau suggested that maybe society itself was the problem, which was an uncomfortable insight. These ideas inspired revolutions. The American Revolution applied Enlightenment philosophy with muskets. 13 British colonies, tired of taxes and being told what to do, decided they would rather govern themselves. The result was a republic based on liberty, equality, and occasionally hypocrisy. Soon after, the French Revolution declared similar ideals, except with guillotines. They believed in liberty, equality, and fraternity, but mostly in cutting off the heads of people who disagreed. It was messy, but it permanently altered the structure of Western politics. Then came the 19th century, which was essentially the Industrial Revolution wrapped in nationalism. Steam engines, railroads, telegraphs, and child labor became normal. Cities grew rapidly. Factories polluted everything. Wealth increased, so did inequality. At the same time, European empires spread across the globe, declaring they were bringing civilization to everyone. This typically meant maps were redrawn, languages erased, and local traditions replaced with tea and bureaucrats. Colonialism brought technology and trauma. By the early 20th century, Western civilization had become very powerful and very nervous. The result was World War I, a conflict that started with the assassination of an archduke and somehow ended with chemical warfare, trench combat, and the collapse of 4 empires. Millions died. Peace treaties were signed. No one was satisfied. This led to World War II, which added tanks, air raids, concentration camps, and atomic bombs to the resume of modernity. Civilization survived, barely. After 1945, Western civilization began rebuilding itself through international cooperation, human rights declarations, and economic optimism. The Cold War followed, a tense, nuclear-armed ideological staring contest between the United States and the Soviet Union. The West, now mostly democratic, capitalist, and extremely into consumer products, declared itself the protector of freedom. The East, being communist, disagreed. Fortunately, the Cold War ended with the collapse of the USSR and only a few near-apocalyptic incidents. In the 21st century, Western civilization finds itself confused. It has extraordinary wealth, technology that can simulate reality, and medicine that extends life, but also loneliness, polarization, and a general sense that something isn't quite right. It questions its own past, wrestles with inequality, rethinks gender, faith, science, and identity, all while scrolling through short videos and forgetting where it left its reading glasses. And yet, the phenomenal truth is this: Western civilization is not a straight line. It is not a perfect arc toward justice, or a pristine tale of progress. It is a long, contradictory conversation, between faith and doubt, reason and emotion, freedom and authority, the soul and the state. It is a civilization built on the tension between what is and what ought to be. It has created cathedrals and atomic bombs, constitutions and concentration camps, symphonies and spreadsheets. Western civilization is remarkable not because it has always been right, but because it has insisted on asking whether it is. It doubts itself. It revises its story. It burns books and then rewrites them. It crucifies prophets and then builds statues to them. It forgets and remembers, collapses and rebuilds. If you are part of the West, you are part of a civilization that once worshipped gods on Mount Olympus, crowned emperors in Rome, copied manuscripts in candlelight, debated reason in salons, overthrew kings, split atoms, landed on the moon, created the internet, and now wonders what to do next. It's a civilization that survives not by perfection, but by persistence. And occasional humility. That, in the end, may be the most phenomenal truth of all.
These are the greatest things of the West: golden ages of Europe, the French Revolution, the Age of Discovery, the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, the Scientific Revolution, the Industrial Revolution, the Greco Roman world of Athens, Rome, Constantinople, Jerusalem, the Roman civilization, the Protestant Reformation, the classical fascist and Nazi revolution, the Communist Socialist Marxist Leninist Revolution or the Soviet Revolution, the Feminist Revolution, the Democratic Liberal and Capitalist Revolution, the Colonial Revolution of Expansionism and Imperialism, European Union and North Atlantic Treaty Organization, Christian Revolution or Christianization and the Great Schism of Roman Catholics and Eastern Orthodox, the Computer Revolution of digital internet online web media cyber revolution. These achievements, advancements, accomplishments, breakthroughs, contributions, development, improvement, betterment, enhancement, growth, invention, innovation, imagination, ideation, intellectual, ideological, creative, political, economic, social, cultural, military, diplomatic, institutional, religious, theological, mythological, linguistic, legal, STEM, art, philosophy, medicine, architecture, architectural greatness of Western European Christian civilization.